This is the Good Government Podcast with Aaron Slutkin and Michael Hoffpauir.
Aaron, I don't know if you know about this. There are 85 Federalist Papers. Have you ever heard that before?
85, huh?
Yeah, 85. And we are talking about Fed 14, Federalist Paper 14 today. We spent a lot of time on Feds 1 through 13, and we're really worried about the Union. Fed 14 here continues that. In fact, it wraps up this consideration of the Union. I think an objection that you might have raised, to use the language of Publius, or at least a concern or something that you would have brought up, is all of this scalable? Is there some point where this thing gets too big and it doesn't work? Is there a Goldilocks here that's just right equals 13 states? 14, 15, it's going to be too cold and not keep us safe. Publius saw us coming and meets this objection, it seems, in Federalist 14. So we're here to talk about Fed 14 and see what we think of Publius's response to this objection. So how you doing, Aaron? Great to see you. Let's talk about the size of the Union and some kindred blood and so forth.
In number 9, we learned that the enlargement of the orbit was one of the improvements in political science that was going to rescue popular government from its reputation, and a well-earned reputation, for anarchy, for instability, for insecurity of property. And in 10, we learned we were going to enlarge the orbit as a means of controlling the effects of faction. But as you know, this is a fairly large continent. And right now we're talking about a coastal republic, 13 states arrayed from New Hampshire down to Georgia, but Publius is imagining a republic that's going to expand. I don't know about west of the Mississippi. We have we have a neighbor in Spain there. We've got the Rocky Mountains to run up against, and later stretching on to the Pacific Ocean, the South Sea. But there's a good question. How far can we extend this thing?
Lewis and Clark is approximately 1805, and historians will speak about Jefferson's ambition to expand. And you had said something about the size of a moose to me at one point, Aaron.
Yeah. Well, this is fantastic. Jefferson was probably the best educated of all Americans on what lay beyond the United States. He had a library of naturalist books. It was the largest such collection in the United States, and he read everything. And even before Lewis and Clark, he's trying to send explorers out west. There's a man named Ledyard, who's actually an ancestor of my boss, who he hires to try to go, to charter a trip west. Instead, Ledyard decides that he's going to walk across the Bering Strait. Jefferson, again, knew more about what was going on than any European American. At the same time, he thinks the Rocky Mountains are a chain of active volcanoes. He thinks the woolly mammoth is wandering the Great Plains. And he also thinks an American moose is so large that a European moose could walk under its legs. And while Jefferson is minister to France, he writes letters back home because he wants to disprove one of these naturalists we heard about in our previous conversation, who thinks that everything in America is smaller. So he sends letters back home. Please, please, please send me all the moose samples you can. And finally, he gets a letter from America. I've got the moose you want. I've got it. Now, probably doubtful as to whether this was as big of a moose as Jefferson was looking for. The guy might have been trying to scam him. But of course, the bones start decaying on the passage over to Europe. So the scheme fails. Jefferson is incredibly embarrassed. But yes, white Americans didn't know what was going on west of the Alleghenies very well. Sorry for that digression.
I think it's funny. I'm sitting here trying to know where to start again. I like the little brownie points, my boss's relative, that you earned there.
Yeah, he's going to love that.
Yeah. So let's take a look at 14 more directly and see the way that Publius is going to offer some thinking or some entryway into how he might think about this question. Fed 14 is a bookend. I think it's important to start there. It's very sensible for readers or students of the Federalist Papers to think of 1 through 14 as a chunk, as an entity with bookends. 1, of course, announces the plan and what's going to go on. But once we turn to 2, we're concerned with union, and 14 is going to wrap that up. Publius declares this plainly in the opening paragraph of 14. I'm going to read it. We have seen the necessity of the union as our bulwark against foreign danger, as the conservator of peace among ourselves, as the guardian of our commerce and other common interests, as the only substitute for those military establishments which have subverted the liberties of the old world, and as the proper antidote to the diseases of faction which have proved fatal to other popular governments, and of which alarming symptoms have been betrayed by our own. So there Publius is talking about everything he's done before. Each of those can be mapped over the previous papers. Publius goes on. All that remains within this branch of our inquiries is to take notice of an objection that may be drawn from the great extent of country which the Union embraces. This is what remains. Did you notice this, Aaron? He's going to speak about those who raise these objections. They have a prejudice. They avail themselves of a prevailing prejudice with regard to the practicable sphere of Republican administration in order to supply by imaginary difficulties the want of those solid objections, which they endeavor in vain to find. So what I want to point out there is the prevailing prejudices bit and the imaginary difficulties bit. What's the simple way that I would understand imaginary difficulties? You're making up problems. You're making stuff up. So even though this is the objection that remains, Publius is going to spend another 3 pages dealing with this what remains imaginary objection. It's no small objection. It's a prevailing prejudice. So Aaron, what do you think about the amount of ink Publius has spilled arguing for the Union?
I think it's hard today to not take the Union for granted. Ever since the Union was vindicated by the Civil War, that triumph in blood, Americans have had a sense that we are essentially a nation state that is subdivided rather than, as Publius is going to say later on, a confederated republic. Our understanding of what an American state is very different from when we apply the term to foreign powers, right? And so unless you can come to the root of these terms and define them, it's very difficult to realize the historical reality is that we are talking about before, at the moment of the founding in 1776, and here when we're worried about disunion, about 13 independent states sharing power under one national head for enumerated purposes. So one does take, if not some historical imagination to get here, it does take a little bit of work to understand where we are in 1788 now.
Publius will argue that it would be novel not to have union. And Aaron and I have sort of verbally wrestled over what this means. It would be novel because this is what this country has known as far as these human beings are concerned. They've been living under a monarch who, no matter the way in which these states were governed, whether they were freely electing their governors or whether their governors were royally appointed, in Pennsylvania, for instance, prior to the Revolution, they nonetheless were still all British subjects. This is what America has known, even if it's under a firm league of friendship called the Articles of Confederation. It would be novel to have something other than union. And not all that is new is good. That's remarkable. Here is this revolutionary Publius, this great improver of political science. These cautioning us against novelty, counseling us for something like conservatism.
Well, and as you rightly point out, it isn't only some kind of conservatism, right? We've always been united, whether it's under a British head, under a league of friendship. The states come into being. They turn from colonies to states at the moment of union. This is something Lincoln draws our attention to in the time frame of the Gettysburg Address, right? 1863 minus 7 equals 1776. At the same time, one of the other reasons union is so important is because popular government is important. Popular government is good. And if we're going to have popular government, as this paper makes the case, and as Federalist 10 made the case, it has to be Republican government. It cannot be Democratic government. One, because we are already dealing with a territory so large, but two, because a pure democracy, by which he understands a group of people gathered in one place, deliberating and deciding, is unstable. It is factional. It does turn tyrannical. There's no respect for minority rights. In paper number 10, first we came to understand what a democracy is. I just gave his definition. We came to understand what a republic is, that is a popular government capable of exercising power over a larger territory and also where the scheme of representation takes place. And we got a theoretical argument for republicanism against democracy. Now we're going to get a more logistical argument. To speak of your higher plane, we're coming down from your higher plane toward a lower one. And this one, it has to do with infrastructure. It has to do with roads and bridges, and it has to do with words like mechanical and concentered and equilibrium.
Yeah, concentered. I love it. Thanks so much for reminding me of the battle between Democratic and Republican government from Fed 10. This is part of the imaginary difficulty. These celebrated authors, as he calls them in paragraph 3 of Fed 14, are confusing us with their fancy pants language and their blurring of distinctions. Look, the error is a logistical problem. So we see these celebrated authors confound Republican government with democratic government. We must be very clear, Publius says. There is a distinction between these forms of government. This is the tail end of paragraph 2. I shall quote it. It is, this distinction, that in a democracy, the people meet and exercise the government in person. In a republic, they assemble and administer it by their representatives and agents. A democracy consequently must be confined to a small spot. A republic may be extended over a large region. Here it's very simple. What is the difference between democracy and Republican government? Representation is the difference. And why is it that democracy can't be big and that Republican government can be big? Representatives can travel and meet. Pure direct democracy, every member of a democracy cannot do that. So these guys are confounding Democratic and Republican government, making imaginary difficulties regarding the size. This government won't work, it's too big, they would say. No, it's Republican. Representatives are going to be able to travel and meet. And Aaron shared with me, what's this stuff about travel time? Let's just say approximately 1800 from Louisiana to New York.
We're talking about 2 to 3 weeks.
In 1800, the link that you shared with me said a week.
Week, okay.
Yeah, a week.
That's not bad.
I don't believe it. So let's make it 2, because I don't believe it, because our wagon wheel is going to break or something ridiculous.
The road conditions are probably idealized there, and we haven't been stopped by highwaymen.
These political philosophers, I'm now going to call these celebrated authors, so-called political philosophers, are to blame for this. They artificially are prejudicing us by confusing the names of government. So when we tie down what a Republican form of government is, as hard as it may be, we should be able to see that union is okay. Publius's definition of Republican government is multifaceted. It changes depending upon the argument at hand. Right now, given this argument, this is the way he's going to speak about it. Because Republican government also required the extended sphere in Fed 10. That was the definition of Republican government there, right? Not merely representation, also representation in an extended sphere. So Publius knows how to make an argument. Straight no chaser argument here. Good album, Aaron. You ever heard that record?
I don't think so.
I'll share it with you later.
So I think one of the questions we have to consider is whether popular government is good as popular government. If we can consider popular government, there are 2 kinds. One is a democracy, one is a republic. It's not clear from 9 and 10 and now that Publius is actually all that interested in living in a democracy. I think one of the things that happens in paragraph 4, and I'm going to read to you a little bit from it, is Publius is training us not only to think of a republic in a certain way, but when we hear popular government, to think Republican government, and in particularly if it's well constructed. Later, we're going to get this term, good government. He says that most of the popular governments of antiquity, in paragraph 4, were of the democratic species, and even in modern Europe, to which we owe the great principle of representation, no example is seen of a government wholly popular and founded at the same time wholly on that principle, that is the popular principle. He's imagining here, let's say England, that has an aristocratic and a monarchical element, but also has representation in the Commons. If Europe has the merit of discovering this great mechanical power in government, by the simple agency of which the will of the largest political body may be concentred, that is, may be concentrated in a center, and its force directed to any object which the public good requires, America can claim the merit of making the discovery the basis of unmixed and extensive republics. Unmixed, no aristocratic or monarchical element. Extensive, being able to extend over a wider sphere than that of a democracy. I've got two things for you. What do you make about his use of the term public good here? And what do you make of the fact that he calls this power mechanical?
Yeah, mechanical meaning here, of course, what are the mechanics of representative government? In a very funny way, Publius has his cake and eats it too. Directly on the page of Federalist number 14, mechanical, it seems to me, means makes distances shorter. That's what representation does. And it's something like a lever. It's a sort of labor-saving device, something like a pulley that enables you to move things in a way that otherwise you could not. In this case, representation makes things closer or shorter. When I said cake and eat it too, isn't there a distance? That was the cool thing about representation back in Fed 10. The longer view that the representative would take over his area, his constituency's various interests, opinions. And so, again, Publius uses the argument. He's not wrong about what he's saying here, is he? I don't think he is wrong in what he's saying here in Fed 14, but it does underline the fact that depending on the angle from which you view the phenomena or the argument that you're trying to take on, presentation can look quite different, and it can have different attributes and qualities about it. So I think that's what mechanical means here. And then as we move into public good, in the first papers you and I are studying together, public good is all about safety. But this is Europe, which discovered this mechanical power by the simple agency. It shows also that the government is limited. Does it not? Whenever you say that this power exists in government and this force may be directed to any object which the public good requires, it shows two things. It shows a wonderful bipolarity about government in this case. It can do anything it has to do and is therefore unlimited insofar as it is limited to the public good. It's boasts a massively expansive power to extend to any object, so long as that is for the sake of, therefore it's constrained, the public good. Not my will, not my desire to dominate my enemies, not my desire to have all of my subjects' money. So public good here, exactly what the public good looks like beyond safety, not having my rights trampled on by a majority power, was elucidated in Fed 10. Sure, that probably is here. But keep in mind, if you're looking at your text, this is prior to the semicolon. This is the way that he's speaking about it in Europe and what Europe did. So the public good should have been something like the common law rights of the British subjects.
Right. Yeah, the largest political body there refers to the commons as opposed to the aristocracy, which are fewer than the commons, and the monarchy, which is one.
Yes, so I can play with it in terms of what Publius has been talking about as the goals of the Union and Constitution. I can put it in the European context and just say this massive wiggle word, the rights of the British subjects as are to be recognized and secured for the sake of the public good. Okay, let me turn it back on you. But America's discovered something. Publius at this point is saying, we've discovered something new. Is this discovery announced in Fed 9? Top of page 64. America can claim the merit of making the discovery the basis of unmixed and extensive republics. Is that announced in the 5 improvements in political science that Publius offers in Fed 9?
I think so, because when Fed 9 kicks off with the discussion of popular governments in history, we are terrified of having a popular government like those of ancient Greece and modern Italy. And the solution are the 5 improvements of political science. Now, if you take the enlargement of the orbit and representation together, you find Publius is hinting at a government that is going to make dual use of these principles. One, the extended orbit is possible because of representation. They go hand in hand, right? But only so far as our faith is going to be in Republican government against those naysayers and from Fed 1 who say popular government is possible. Only then do we see that this government not only will be extensive, but also unmixed, that it will not have aristocratic or monarchical elements. I think that is purely announced here, which is, by the way, the anti-Feds are claiming this is going to turn into an aristocratic or monarchical government. Publius is saying, you're wrong. This is a 100% popular, unmixed government. To my point that he was right, he's trying to change how we think of what popular government is.
Okay, so I am not going to turn the screws and bring up that we're going to soon see the difference between the House and the Senate. And then we're going to see the executive. And then we're going to see the Supreme Court. Boy, there sure are some mixed government things going on by the time we come to learn of those. But men, we are going to undergo an education prior to then. And so that's what I want to say if anybody's apoplectic right now and saying, what are you talking about? It wasn't the Senate as originally conceived especially meant to be aristocratic? It was appointed by state legislatures. Wasn't it very removed from the people? What I want to point out about this is even right now, we are undergoing a pretty serious education. It's dialectic. And right now we need to be sort of purged of this view of democracy, be initiated into this view of Republican government.
Let me summarize the next couple paragraphs and we can see what we want to lean into. He describes the natural limit of democracy, which is the largest point from which you and I can go into the assembly and deliberate and decide. The natural limit of a democracy is shorter than the natural limit of a republic. Natural limit of a republic is extended because of the device, the mechanical device of representation. He tells us that if we're concerned about a extended republic, actually the United States currently isn't very large. If we think of the territory currently belonging to the United States, which extends to the Mississippi River, extends a different dimension north and south, also isn't that large. The territory of the United States as we have it in 1787, actually not, you anti-federalists, too big to have a popular government. Further, into a few secondary reasons why this country is not too large. One is that state governments will do a lot of the administering. He says in paragraph number 8, the national government's jurisdiction is limited to certain enumerated objects.
Wait, before you get this far, though, let me point out something. The argument is done at paragraph 6. He puts his head down and redoubles his efforts, Aaron, and where you just went. Let's slow down just a touch, please. We have a logistical argument in paragraphs 5 and 6 that is not the principled argument. That's in Fed 10. And it's a logistical argument that says, look, it can work. We can have representatives coming to these places. And then in paragraph 7, before Aaron picks back up in paragraph 8, in paragraph 7, Publius says, favorable as this view of the subject may be, some observations remain, which will place it in a light still more satisfactory. So the objection to the Union is so serious that more observations must be added. Aaron and I have discussed, well, wait a minute, why does the Federalist Papers go on after Fed 14? And I think we have a good answer to that. But you could ask, why doesn't Fed 14 itself end at paragraph 6? Why does Publius have to heap more logs on the fire, make his argument that much stronger? That, for me, underlines the severity of the challenge he faces. Publius's political science, as we come to learn, teaches that you must have power commensurate to the ends. He teaches that about government itself. That if your goal is to keep us safe, you must have the power to keep us safe, for instance, Fed 23. So why can't I take that understanding of government and put it on his own arguments, the way he makes arguments, his rhetorical strategy? And as where Aaron was taking us into the 8th paragraph, I think really underlines that, and we need to appreciate that. Why study the Union this much? It's a big deal. Why is it a big deal? Well, because it's essential to our safety. And safety is the springboard for everything else that can come. Happiness, most importantly. Okay, well, let me answer it differently. Why make all this argument for Union? Because the forces arguing against Union necessitate it. So you thought I was done? I'm going to bring up, what is it? 4 more points here? Yeah. So I'm sorry to interrupt you, Aaron. I just really wanted to my flair for drama. I wanted to make sure to bring this up. So as you were saying, we turn to the states in paragraph 8 of Fed 14.
Yeah, after pointing to numerous European examples where legislatures operating over extensive territory or in continuous operation, he looks back into the United States and says, first, we have subordinate states, subordinate political units, which will handle the administration in localities. So this national government, although it will operate over the extent of the territory, won't be doing the things like delivering the mail or public safety. The smaller units will do that, and their creatures, the towns and counties, will do that. Second, as the country continues to grow, we'll have to take up this subject again. In paragraph number 10, we get the third point, which is logistics will keep improving. We'll get better at building roads and canals and making more navigable the rivers that intertwine west and east. That is principally what we're talking about, west and east.
So in a funny way, technology will allow us to expand and at the same time make things smaller.
Right. Yeah, that's the mechanical principle.
That's the mechanical principle at work now in paragraph 10 with roads, interior navigation, communication, canals, all of the beneficence of nature, which we may then harness and make the most of in paragraph 10.
And then lastly, is as we are bringing new states into the Union, they will see a peculiar benefit in Union. So let's imagine a state on the western frontier, let's say Iowa. Iowa may not realize in one sense how beneficial the Union is to her, right? She's very far from Washington, D.C. The railroads that are going to be emanating from the East Coast toward the interior of the continent may come to her slowly. Yet at the same time, Iowa is going to be worried about Spaniards or about Frenchmen or about the British coming in. So they will find a unique attachment to the Union that those on the East Coast will not, because they and the frontier are the stragglers most likely to get picked off. So he says if they should derive less benefit, therefore, from the Union in some respects than the less distant states, they will derive greater benefit from it in other respects, and thus the proper, another physics word, equilibrium will be maintained throughout. We will have the sort of the desire to be in the Union will equalize, because even if in Maryland we're not worried about getting picked off by a foreign power, in Iowa they will, and then everyone will have a common feeling toward the Union. These are the 4 points he makes.
By paragraph 11, you say, well, as we expand and get rid of foreign countries who were otherwise occupying that territory or owning it or whatever, why would I continue to worry about my safety? Shouldn't my concern about my safety lessen if we could eventually take over this whole thing? I think this would be something wise to think about today. At that point, I would say, don't forget about the economic arguments of the way in which the Union is like a high tide which lifts all ships. As Publius has tried to show, the interconnected market that comes with the Union that should make for greater prosperity in America. If it's safety here in this fourth consideration in Federalist 14 on page 66 of our edition, okay, cool. And if you don't buy that, don't forget about all the money I was talking about just 3 papers ago. So it's all on display here, Aaron. So we need strong centralized states. We need the Union. Let's go. So now we're at my favorite paragraph of Federalist 14, paragraph 12. Is this okay to move to this now?
Yeah, let's ratchet it up.
Okay. So the tone here in this 12th paragraph is remarkable. It's got a wonderful application of Publius's political education he's offered us thus far. To repeat, from 1 through 13 of the Federalist Papers, Publius has offered arguments based in safety, of course, and self-preservation. And he's shown us the whole time the Union is necessary for safety. So the argument thus far is contained within this matrix or horizon, safety. But 14 ends with a reprise of Federalist 1. So much so that it uses the same language. Fed 14, the final sentence, culminates in a call to deliberation. You are now to deliberate and to decide. So we're now to deliberate and decide. I know you already told me that, dude, in Federalist 1. But I'm not the same person, is what I would say to you. Publius knows we're not in the same place we were when he called upon us to do that in Fed 1. We have to keep in mind, essential to any deliberation and choosing here amongst the free and political peoples is common opinion. We have to have some shared premises. We have to have some shared understandings. Publius has been trying to build that thus far. And he's really going to put his finger on the scale here in this wonderful 12th paragraph. Aaron, I'd like to go to kindred blood, but I don't want to do so at the expense of you speaking about anything that comes prior to approximately the middle of this paragraph.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm pushing back against something you've said. It seems that when we started in Fed 2, we had, to allude to kindred blood, which will come up later, we had a people with a common language, history, experience, heritage, religion, who have been binded together by a union of interest, right? This union will make you safe. It will make your commerce more productive. It will protect your property better. It will keep you safer from faction. And so maybe as we've been lowered a little bit from papers 3 to 13, and especially this seems like at some level, when we're talking about roads and canals as an important principle in Republican government logistically, I mean, this may be sort of the low point of spirit in the first 14 papers. So now we're gonna lift it back up again. And there's an interesting question.
I got to interrupt you. I felt as if all the conversation about taxation was a low point. I'm both trying to be funny and very serious. Oh my God, it's so boring. And also,
yes, well, and we said
area.
as much last conversation, right? But there's an interesting question in this paragraph of whether Publius thinks he's an innovator. We start hearing a series of voices in our head. Hearken not to the unnatural voice, which tells you that the people of America can no longer live together. Hearken not to the voice which petulantly tells you that the form of government recommended for your adoption is a novelty in the political world. Hold on a second. Didn't we hear a second ago that this is a novelty? That the great principle of representation, which was invented by the Europeans, well, a new version of it in an unmixed and extended government has been invented here. So don't we have a problem? Publius has earlier said the Americans are taking credit for the principle of the extended republic. Now he's saying that we're not innovating. No, that's not at all what he says. He's talking about a different kind of innovation, which leads into kindred blood.
This is the bottom of page 66. The kindred blood. Well, let me go back a previous sentence because it's too fun. No, my countrymen, shut your ears against this unhallowed language. Shut your hearts against the poison which it conveys. The kindred blood, which flows in the veins of American citizens, the mingled blood which they have shed in defense of their sacred rights, consecrate their union, and excite horror at the idea of their becoming aliens, rivals, enemies. This is remarkably hallowed language. You rightly remind us of Fed 2. This is the grounds for the opinion we are to share regarding the goodness of the Union and the Constitution. Ratify, ratify, ratify. And that's why I would say that the union here that Publius has been harping on for all these papers that we've been discussing is not merely a physical, logistical union. Just like we see Publius's arguments against democracy and for representative government are not limited to logistics. There's also a principle there. So this is not merely to be a union of states, a physical union. It's also to be a union of sentiment, of shared principles. We are to have the same habits, that's Fed 2. We're to have the same loyalties. And I think most importantly, we're to have the same loves. We are therefore agreeing about the ends of government, of our actions, of our choices. And then because we agree on those things, we can now, thanks to Publius's education he's offered us, agree on the means to attain those ends. I think it's remarkable. Now, Publius, go ahead, Aaron, excuse me.
I was going to ask, do you know the Sullivan-Ballou letter?
No, what's this?
In 1861, shortly before the Battle of Bull Run, a captain of the Rhode Island Volunteers wrote a letter home to his wife. It's an "if I die" letter. Remember me. I trust you to take care of our children. Meet me in heaven. And in the second paragraph of the letter, he says, "I have no misgivings about or lack of confidence in the cause in which I am engaged. My courage does not halt or falter. I know how strongly American civilization now leans upon the triumph of government, and how great a debt we owe to those who went before us through the blood and suffering of the Revolution, and I am willing, perfectly willing, to lay down all my joys in this life to help maintain this government and to pay that debt." I mean, how successful is this call of Publius's in Federalist 14 that 80 years later, at another moment of grave doubt for the Union, Americans are eloquently appealing to that kindred blood that consecrates their Union, right? That makes their Union holy. This kind of political, religious language that often we give Lincoln credit to for, it does seem like it's starting here, right? That word consecrate, we find that in the Gettysburg Address as well.
We also know, let's just stick with dear Lincoln, the concerns that Lincoln raises in the Lyceum Address and the viability, long-term viability of such veneration when the living reminders are no longer to be had, when there are no longer the scars of these battles or the fathers or uncles to tell us these tales. So we're and what's said here in 14 as we move through this concern over veneration, and I'm using that word now very intentionally. You know where I'm calling my shot. This is not Publius's last word on any of this veneration. Fed 49 is an amazing paper on the power and necessity of veneration for maintaining, in that case, in 49, the structures of government, the Constitution. And Lincoln's worried about that in the Lyceum Address as well. People have the uncanny ability to associate what's old with what's good. Yet we're revolutionaries and we're engaging in something that's novel / not novel, yet veneration, association of what's old with what's good is a additive, productive of political stability. So Publius is now playing with a lot of different important ingredients in fashioning our understanding of why the Constitution and the Union are good, which will require us seeing it as venerable, no matter that we're choosing and deciding to live under it. I'm definitely calling my shot and riffing on Fed 49 a little. Yeah, that's great. I hadn't read that letter. Thanks. You did that in your research into what?
It's read in the Ken Burns Civil War documentary.
Nice.
I think it had circulated among Civil War historians for a long time, and that when they have an actor read it and they've got the Ashokan farewell playing in the background, it's just enough to turn you into a puddle. But to get to return to your point about innovation, he applauds, and again, this is so, he has to walk such a tightrope because we are revolutionaries, right?
Yeah.
We are innovating. We're talking about innovations in political science, but he actually says that the anti-federalists are the innovators because they want to rend the Union. Listen to his language. Is it not the glory of the people of America, that whilst they have paid a decent regard to the opinions of former times and other nations, they have not suffered a blind veneration for antiquity, for custom, or for names to overrule the suggestions of their own good sense, the knowledge of their own situation, and the lessons of their own experience? I'm reminded of a conversation that you and I had before about the phrase, I think it was reflective patriotism. The problem is not reverence for the past. The problem is blind reverence for the past.
That's right. Blind reverence.
Right.
That's the problem. That's right.
If you can come to revere the past through reason, if you can realize why these edifices around you still are standing and then to work to maintain them, then you're not worshiping idols, right? You're working toward your own political stability and flourishing. You have to be also willing to change things, right? You have to be willing to practice innovations onto the republic when you've discovered them in your political science. But notice Publius loves the term airy projections. We get projections in here. We're not projecting. We are finding these innovations in the state constitutions, which we learned in number 10, we can praise, but also we can criticize, right? Publius is finding this in a correct reading of Montesquieu as opposed to an incorrect reading of Montesquieu. He's looking to Europe, he's looking to the vast extent of territory, and he's saying some things have to change, but we have traditions that we should honor, but not blindly.
Aaron, to put a word that is a virtue on everything you just said, it's so awesome. Prudence. Everything you just described is Publius's prudence, and he's trying to help us be prudent, as challenging as that may be. Publius saying don't take up a blind reverence for antiquity is in defense of his own novelties, the novelty of the experiment that is extended government here. But as we've discussed now 15 times in our conversation today, not being a union and republic would be more novel. And just again, if you're excited about this notion of veneration and reverence for things, just go ahead and jump forward to Fed 49. I do suggest you start by making sure to read Fed 47. But how about, since we're having this conversation about how to think about the past, what about those revolutionaries themselves? In fact, he's going to use a funny word, the leaders of the revolution. How should I think about them? Would I be doing those guys a disservice? We had all this hallowed language of the mingled blood which they shed in defense of their sacred rights. Well, if I change things, am I not being ungrateful to them? Is somehow unjust? Those guys died for this. Shouldn't I live the way that they thought? Let's look at this. This is about, I don't know, a little over halfway through paragraph 12, Fed 14. To this manly spirit, posterity will be indebted for the possession and the world for the example of the numerous innovations displayed on the American theater in favor of private rights and public happiness. What a sentence. Had no important step been taken by the leaders of the revolution, for which a precedent could not be discovered, no government established, of which an exact model did not present itself, the people of the United States might, at this moment, have been numbered among the melancholy victims of misguided counsels, must at best have been laboring under the weight of some of those forms which have crushed the liberties of the rest of mankind. Leaders is a dirty word. And yet it's used positively here because it's about those leaders of the revolution. It's about our fathers, our brothers, our benefactors, for crying out loud. And its positive statement, at least the use of it contextually here, shows those guys were awesome, but they were moderate. And also, please notice, they did make some errors. And we're here to fix them, and that's okay, and they'd be okay with that. Publius and the Constitution must fix the errors, and that's okay. They're not going to be mad at us for doing that. To continue, unless, Aaron, you want to jump in?
No, please.
I'm going to finish the paragraph. Happily for America, happily we trust for the whole human race, they pursued a new and more noble course. They accomplished a revolution which has no parallel in the annals of human society. They reared the fabrics of government which have no model on the face of the globe. They formed the design of a great confederacy which it is incumbent on their successors to improve and perpetuate. So it's our responsibility, not merely to steward it, but to improve and perpetuate the great confederacy that they designed. Publius allows us to see. I'm going to continue reading. If their works betray imperfections, we wonder at the fewness of them. If they erred most in the structure of the Union, this was the work most difficult to be executed. This is the work which has been new modeled by the act of your convention, and it is that act on which you are now to deliberate and to decide. Why spill so much ink over the Union? This is the work most difficult to be executed. Are you up to the challenge, Publius says? I mean, think of the rhetorical force of that. So Publius here speaks of new modeled constitution at whose convention? Your convention, he says. Notice he says, your convention. It's newly modeled because there are no models out there. America's wholly new. All of this stuff is wholly new, as Aaron has emphasized here back in paragraph 4. This is a discovery. This is our discovery. Final words on this, please. Where's Publius? Where's Publius now? He hides himself. He's hidden. He's receded. It's not his constitution. It's not his plan. It's not his convention. He hides himself and he doesn't take credit. It's your convention. So he doesn't take credit. He recedes into the backdrop and tells us what's ours and what we should love. Because this is ours, we should care for it. Because we love it, we should care for it. Decide in favor of the Constitution and Union.
I think there is a lesson for anyone who wants to be an innovator, who wants to tinker with existing constitutions, which from this paragraph and the portion you just read, you need to be grateful for the models that you are perfecting. You need to feel some kind of awe for the people who created them. You need to feel humility before the task of reforming them and not think that if they erred, it was because they were blithering idiots and you have all the answers. And here, maybe this is similar to gratitude, but love is necessary too.
I think, of course, I've used that language. I mean, it's a form of care, to be sure, and that's how you get people. This is my favorite language. I heard this like on NPR last year, and I keep returning to it because it's so insightful, and I love it. You don't wash a rental car. Boy, I've trashed rental cars over the years. In my youth, we should just destroy rental cars. But you know what I do? I've like washed the underbelly of my car. You know, like I take care of my things that are mine, that I labor for and deliberate about and then choose. There are many like it, but this one is mine. What is this called, in other words? Have we seen this in the Federalist Papers announced as a challenge? Yes, we have. Self-love. Publius discusses the love of one's own, or self-love, in Fed 10, which we attach to our opinions. And then they have this reciprocal effect and we become intransigent. And Publius has to show us how to deal with that problem. That's that just natural aspect of human beings that's responsible for faction, to be sure, along with our different faculties. So he's going to cut self-love, going to give us a bunch of soma and cut self-love out of us, a la, Brave New World or any of this stuff. Any of these dystopian movies, you notice that's what they get rid of. Go watch THX 1148. You're going to see this is what they're doing. Publius here instead, as you'll see many of brilliant political philosophers do in other works, is channeling this self-love. It's a strength of Republican government. Machiavelli will help us understand this very clearly. Yeah, the language of love is here because while love can be the enemy for minority rights in Fed 10, it can be the champion of all of our rights in securing good government as brought about by the Union and the Constitution here. It just has to be channeled. And in order for it to be channeled, guess what? I have to come to learn to love it. Learning to love Lincoln, I believe Diana Schaub wrote something that titled this before. But we have to come to learn to love the Constitution and the Union, thanks to the education offered here by Publius. There's no question in my mind, not only is it the language of love being used here, or the sentiment of love being used here, but there's a sort of quasi-religious language here. It's quasi-religious union here, that we're to love as our own. It's us. It's who and what we are as Americans, a nation unified. It's the goal of the Federalist Papers, I would argue, to make us into those who understand the Union and the Constitution as us, as our own, so that the Union and the Constitution can be us and be our own. This is a remarkable education, a civic and liberal education, according to the basis of the improved, or new political science of Publius. Yeah, this paper is incredible. The first 14 papers, man, it's been a long ride, to be sure.
Yeah.
And we've left a lot of stones not turned over and probably made some mistakes. And that's why I'll read these again and try harder. What do you think, Aaron?
I think I buy the case for union. If part of our mental exercise was, and look, I live 45 miles from the center, right? Publius says that the advantages of the union should be obvious and evident to me. But of course, part of our mental exercise was to imagine that we're listening to, at first, the whispers of disunion, And now, I mean, come on, it's in the paper appearing alongside Publius, some of these arguments for disunion and for separate confederacies. One of the things that we had to do as readers, which was try to imagine that we were capable of being convinced either way. And now I understand the union is essential to my safety, and the union is salutary for the enjoyment of my property, for the flourishing of my commerce, for economizing the civil lists, all of these different points, the importance of the union to my safety and my political prosperity, as he says in paper number 1. He's got me. Now, the work isn't over. As you said at the beginning of this conversation, there are 85 papers we have to read, 71 more. But we know what we're going to get into now. We've accepted the union as essential, and now we're going to learn more about the Constitution and about what well-constructed union actually means.
I want to add one more thing to this. You're totally right. It's a great closer. I'm so sorry to step on it, Aaron. Also, we're reading why the union matters to me in the late 1700s. California, I'm not even going to talk about Texas. California got permission to put on the 2028 ballot secession.
How many times have they done this?
Ballot initiative to make state a country is cleared to gathered signatures.
Calexit.
This is the 5th largest economy in the world, if I recall correctly, California. How would you start to help me think about that from what we've learned from these Federalist Papers? What it would mean for the United States, what the international relations would be between the United States and the California People's Republic?
Well, one, before thinking about your question, Publius might have been able to convince the people of the UK that Brexit was a bad idea for their safety or for their economic and political prosperity, but failed to. But if we want to use Publius's arguments about California independence, we would have to say to Californians, look, do you really want to risk going to war with New Mexico and Nevada and Oregon and your neighbors? I don't know how many fighting men California has. Pardon me, fighting men and women California has. But they share a border with Mexico, right? What's that going to look like when they don't have the other 49 states to come to their defense? And yes, they are the 5th or so largest economy in the world, as you point out. But maybe that's because of their relationship to the union. Maybe it's because the union makes their commerce flourish.
This is great. This is fun. It's really exciting to think about. Aaron, these are good points. What's good about what you've just pointed out is the question still is not settled. It would be worth wondering whether or not the state of California is simply saying, I'm going to take my ball and go home.
Yeah, right. Trump is in office again. We don't want to play with you guys.
And this is something this is, for instance, a way that Alan Guelzo views secession at the time of the Civil War, of Lincoln's ascent to the presidency. Guelzo is remarkable on this. It's very insightful of the fact that their principles are not just. And so I would invite anyone to go look at his work. He's an amazing Lincoln scholar. This was in no small part the talk that he gave at the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University it was either fall of 23 or spring of 24. They put all their stuff up on YouTube. Check out his talk there. I highly recommend it. Well, Aaron, what's up, man? I'm going to go eat some dinner and move around and get out of this chair in office. It's been great talking with you about this stuff. I can't wait to see you again soon and keep it going.
Yeah, man. Take care.
Thanks.
This has been the Good Government Podcast with Aaron Slutkin and Michael Hoffpauir.